former U.S. Attorney General. Welcome to City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I'm Colin Jones from City Club's Board of Governors. For over 100 years, City Club of Portland is where civic-minded people come together to make Portland and Oregon a better place for everyone to live, work, and explore. We're gathered at the Sentinel Hotel, along with all of you joining us through KGW's website, Facebook feed, or news app, X-Ray FM, or on Open Signal's community media television stations. The generous support of City Club's media partners and corporate sponsors enable us to put on the state's best civic programs week after week. I would like to recognize City Club's fall sponsor, Avangrid Renewables. Please show our appreciation. In November 2016, Oregon voters overwhelmingly approved two statewide education initiatives designed in part to provide students with meaningful, hands-on experiential learning opportunities. Measure 98, the High School Graduation in College and Career Readiness Act, provides high school students across Oregon with access to vocational and career technical education opportunities, college-level courses, and dropout prevention strategies and support. Measure 99, Outdoor School for All, provides Oregon 5th or 6th graders with access to a full week of science-infused outdoor learning. Both community initiatives garnered huge support, with more than 65% voter approval. Joining us today are two speakers to share what's happened since the voters approved these measures and what students can expect this year and beyond. Toya Fick is the Executive Director of Stand for Children Oregon. After beginning her career as a middle school science teacher, then serving in education policy roles at the state and national levels, Toya joined Stand for Children as the Director of Government Relations. She became Stand Oregon's Executive Director in 2014. Together with Latino Network and Governor Ted Kulongowski, Stand for Children was a leading force behind the successful Measure 98 ballot initiative. Toya formerly served on City Club's Board of Directors and is currently on the boards of the Oregon Food Bank and Meyer Memorial Trust. Nancy Bales is the Executive Director of the Gray Family Foundation and Chair of the Outdoor School Advisory Committee for Oregon State University Extension Service. Nancy joined the Gray Family Foundation, a supported organization of the Oregon Community Foundation, in 2014 after 13 years at EcoTrust. The Gray Family Foundation seeks to engage the people in Oregon in becoming active stewards of their natural and built communities through investments that increase meaningful outdoor learning experiences for K-12 students. Nancy was part of the core leadership team for the Outdoor Education Coalition, and the Gray Family Foundation was the principal funder of the Outdoor School for All campaign. Our moderator today is Cheryl Myers, Transition Director of the Educator Advancement Council at Oregon's Chief Education Office. Cheryl is the former Director of Culture and Inclusion for Oregon's Higher Ed Coordinating Commission, or HEC, and Cheryl served as HEC's first Chief of Staff before becoming their intellectual leader and convener on equity and diversity issues. She previously served as the Governor's Director of Economic and Business Equity and has 2 decades of private sector business ownership experience. Cheryl served 8 years as an elected school board member for the North Clackamas School District. Please welcome our incredible speakers.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to have you all here, and those of you that are viewing and listening online. I'm so honored to be here with these two amazing folks, and we're just going to have a little intimate conversation that you all get to be a part of. So before we talk about what's happening currently, would each of you just take a few moments and talk about sort of what led up to pursuing the citizen initiative approach, and then we can talk about today.
Sure, I'll start. So when we started working on Measure 98 in 2015, Oregon was dead last in terms of high school graduation rates. We were 49 out of 49 reporting states, and we'd sort of been at the bottom for a little while. And so what we really wanted to do was provide a comprehensive, statewide, systemic approach to addressing our graduation rates. And so we had worked at the legislative level on a few things over the last few years and just really found that a bit frustrating. I love my friends at the legislature, but they don't necessarily do comprehensive approaches to these kinds of solutions. And so what we really wanted to do was take this to the people of Oregon to say, you know, we've worked with districts over the last few years. We've asked them what they needed to help our students succeed in high school. They've given us these three solutions: career technical education, college-level courses, dropout prevention, and we want to bring those to scale. What do you think of it? And we were very happy and surprised that the citizens of Oregon said, yes, we need to do this. We need to do this right now. But what led up to it was really wanting to have a comprehensive solution to a vexing problem that was happening all across our state.
Yeah, and very similar with Measure 99. Outdoor School, of course, is a program that has been around in Oregon for a very long time. It has a really deep history, and many people don't know, but it actually started in 1957 in Southern Oregon. It was started in very rural communities. And since that time, it's been very inconsistent in funding. In the 80s, almost all of Oregon kids had the opportunity to attend outdoor school. And since that time, we've seen that erode, and it's often the kids that need it the most that don't have that opportunity. And we were seeing a lot of that inconsistency. We started in 2014 in full force in this effort and worked with the legislature, and the first phase was Senate Bill 439, which was a policy framework for outdoor school, and it's what named Oregon State University Extension as the home and kind of set up the goals for the program. And we had overwhelming support from the legislature. It was almost unanimous passing of Senate Bill 439, which really told us we were on the right track. And going to the citizens with Measure 99 and the ballot initiative for the funding was really that piece that we needed to ensure that kids were really going to have this opportunity. So it felt really great to get the support around the state. We didn't need something like what happened in the Gorge to tell us that this program was really important. I mean, we've known this for a long time, and voters, said they believe that. Legislators said they believe that.
Great. So you thought about, you convened, you investigated, so it was just really easy to go through the initiative process, right? No? Only half the states in our country allow initiative processes. So talk about a little bit what that initiative process was for each of the campaigns.
Sure. It was fun, but also heart-wrenching at times. We put together what we thought was a really good piece of legislation, right? The measure is actually a piece of legislation. And it goes through the process of coming up with a ballot title, which is what people read when they vote yes or no. And so we knew that would be a process, and really glad we started as early as we did, because it took about 8 months to get from handing in the piece of paper to the Secretary of State's office to getting a ballot title back from the Supreme Court. And it was gut-wrenching and hard at times, and we just went back and forth with our attorney and with folks for quite some time. And it's a blind process. You just send in your best argument and hope for the best. And then there's the part about getting enough signatures to qualify. So we had a lot of volunteers throughout the state We were very fortunate to have folks all up and down the corridor in Eastern Oregon, working on our campaign. We had a lot of partners in this effort. We worked with Latino Network was mentioned. Carmen Rubio was one of the co-chief petitioners, but we also had a lot of community-based organizations who really wanted these kinds of supports for kids throughout the state. So we had a great volunteer base of folks who helped us gather the signatures, and then again, you just submit your stuff and you wait. And then hopefully you have enough signatures to qualify by the deadline. But it's quite a process. It took about a year to get from start to finish and then start an actual campaign, which is what people saw when they finally got their ballots in October to turn them in by November 8th. So yeah, I had no idea, and it's not something I would love to do again or anything like that. So don't count on that.
Wonderful. Nancy?
Yeah, it's very true. Yeah, it's a big process. It's a big commitment, and it's scary because you go into it and you don't know what you don't know, right? So I think with Measure 99, we had such overwhelming passion around this program. I think it showed that a lot of Oregonians had this experience in the 80s in school, and we had young people that program had changed their lives, and that passion really helped us in this. It helped us put together an amazing volunteer team. I can't even the amount of volunteer hours, especially from some of the core people that worked on this, are just unbelievable. And I think that's really, it goes to how much people care about outdoor school and how it affected people's lives. And so from that point, we really had a leg up. This was a historical program that people knew about and cared about.
I think it really helped to have something that was very straightforward. I mean, I remember canvassing and going to farmers markets and with my clipboard and saying, do you want to help us improve high school graduation rates? And I don't think very many people said no, right? So we could then engage in a conversation about what that means and how to do that. But having something super straightforward that most people sort of identify with really helped us to get where we needed to go in terms of qualifying for the ballot. And I think outdoor school is the very same way.
Absolutely. Yeah, it seems interesting. Both of these measures, I think a lot of voters were able to hearken back to some form of experience that in many cases I would imagine would be surprising that they don't exist for all students across our state today. Well, they will again, we hope. So speaking of that, overwhelming public support, passage, but coming into a very challenging budget shortfall. So they were both initiatives were underfunded by about half. So what do you believe can still be accomplished even with the level of funding that the legislature was able to commit, which I'm sure there's a lot of gratitude around, but it's still not what was initially hoped for?
Yeah, for Measure 99, I mean, we felt very privileged that outdoor school was now being recognized as a program of the state, and that we had this home at Oregon State University Extension Services to kind of be that statewide program hub for this. When it came to the legislative funding, it was really tough. We recognized that as a program of the state with, a huge fiscal shortfall, it was also sort of a responsibility to try to figure out how could we work with the legislators on this. And we looked really hard at, like, where's the program right now and what is that level of funding we would need in order to successfully launch this program within OSU and make sure that statewide schools had access to this. And then what was the ramp up? So we did get less funding. We got $24 million for the first biennium instead of $44 million. But we also think that we are going to be able to execute the program in a really successful way in this first biennium and work to ramp up those schools and programs and bring them on board. We are going to be ready for full funding. There is a lot of excitement out there about this. But we feel like we're in a pretty good place at this point, and the philanthropic partners that have worked through this are all staying on board to help make sure that any gaps that exist are filled. So we've been really lucky in that way too.
Nancy, how will districts be prioritized in this first biennium?
Yeah, well, they're waiting to see if they're going to need to do some prioritization, because it could be that at this point, the amount of funding that's requested, we could be able to fill those needs completely. But after that, they really will be looking at where are those programs that have not traditionally don't have other resources to help fill them. And I think it's going to be a lot of working district by district and school by school to make sure that the programs that have slipped through the gaps are going to be funded.
Thank you.
So for Measure 98, it's important to remember that the ballot measure was a statutory change, and so the legislature could make changes to it as it saw fit, just with a simple majority. And I'll just say that we were at a ceremony yesterday where the governor signed the legislative changes into law just yesterday, and just reminded me of all the work that it took to get to this place. So our job was to make sure the legislature understood what Measure 98 does and how it would impact their schools and their districts. We spent a lot of time talking to them about the vote count and what it looked like in every single legislative district across the state, so they weren't just beholden to Stand for Children or Latino Network or the folks who worked on the campaign, but people in their districts who voted for it, and children in their districts who were counting on these new resources to come into their high schools this current school year. So we spent a lot of time talking with legislators. There was a work group, if you will, to look at the measure to see what kind of changes needed to be made to provide more flexibility to districts, particularly smaller districts. And we worked through a process with them, with Colt Gill, who's here from the governor's office, with others on what that could look like. So there were some policy changes to the measure, not anything too huge. But the funding was your question. We got $170 million. Schools got $170 million of the $300 million that the measure asked for, and I call it a healthy down payment on the work that needs to happen for kids. We have been talking to districts over this last couple of months since the legislature adjourned, and they're doing some amazing things with the resources. They're buying counselors to help focus on ninth graders to make sure that they're coming into high school with a different experience, with folks who know their names and understand what they're going through, and will help reach out to them to make sure that they don't fall through the cracks. Many districts are expanding their career technical opportunities for kids. They had programs underway, maybe some districts didn't have enough space in their schools for the classrooms, so they're adding more capacity in that level. But districts are really using the resources pretty well so far, and are excited for full funding in the next biennium. So it's really our job to make sure that legislators are connecting back to their schools and understanding what's happening on the ground, to make sure that we're going into this next session in about a year and a half with a bigger chorus of folks who want to continue Measure 98 and fund it at a full level in this next biennium.
Great. So I understand, Toya, that all 197 school districts have applied.
Yes. They all said, you know what, we could use those resources to improve our high school graduation rates. So every single district has submitted what was a one-page, very simple application to say, I want our resources for dropout prevention and career technical education and college-level opportunities for kids in high schools. Yes, we're super excited about that.
Yay! So if you would each just share the work of these two initiatives has been happening in parts of our state, but not in all of our states. So would you speak to the equity imperative and how you really see these initiatives, the difference that they're making in being able to provide access to all?
Well, for outdoor school, one of the things that really struck me as I was talking to other funders here in the district, that fund, Multnomah ESD and the metropolitan area, and it's evident that there's resources here for schools that don't exist in other parts of the state, and so I think this is an opportunity for rural schools to have that same access. The thing that's really special about outdoor school is that it's both a shared experience that we have as Oregonians across the state, so all kids get this experience, But it's also a unique experience that really is about the priorities of the community. And so it looks very different in different parts of the state, and it's meant to look different because if you're on the coast, you're going to be studying something different than if you're in the forest or you're in the high desert. And the communities, what the communities care about and the natural resources of that community and the priorities are different in different places. And so the program is actually structured to address that and to continue to support that. So I think as this rolls out, we've heard a lot from schools who just need flexibility in how they think about the program because Eastern Oregon schools, many of them only go 4 days. So what does a week-long program look like for a 4-day-a-week school, or a school in Eastern Oregon where the teachers are doing 6 jobs and they're not necessarily available, and what are those other resources that they can access, watershed councils or Forest Service personnel. So it's that I think having the real benefit of having this statewide home for this program is Oregon State University Extension has vast resources from staffing expertise and research in all different kinds of areas to be able to gather data, share data out and information, and as part of Extension Service, they're already in every community in the state, and they're trusted people. So that's going to go a long ways in getting this program out there and getting access to all students in the state.
Great, thank you.
So for Measure 98, I love the fact that our 3 chief petitioners were 2 women of color and a man who grew up in the foster care system. So the 3 of us would not sign our names onto something that didn't really think about equity, right? It was a very important part of the work of Measure 98. And so the measure does require districts to think differently about kids of color, low-income kids, kids who are falling behind a little bit and are falling through the cracks of our system. It starts with making sure those students have the supports they need, whether they're inside the building in terms of counselors and teachers or wraparound supports with community-based organizations, many of whom signed up to support Measure 98 because of that. And asking districts to really look at how they're supporting those kids differently and providing access to the other 2 pieces. So the measure requires districts to increase the number of college-level courses or supports and whatnot offered to students. But it also says that you have to have a non-biased way to have students enter those programs, right? So we don't want to create a system where there's so many more college-level opportunities and our kids of color aren't participating in them. And so one of the things we will be working with the Department of Education on as districts are rolling out these programs is to look and see how many of our students are getting access to those classes and who they are and what they look like and what their social economic status is, to make sure all kids are benefiting from these opportunities. We want to make sure that they all have better graduation rates and are better prepared for their future. So the 3 of us were very clear about that, and as we were writing the measure, thinking about how we make sure districts are doing that and then how we check back in to make sure that's still happening. So that was equity was a huge part of how we built Measure 98 and what the campaign looked like and what the things that we talked about along the way.
So are there any things that you could call out that you see are popping up in regard to how that's being addressed in the rollout?
Sure. So one of the things that we are working with our districts on is how they're reaching out to community-based organizations, how they're reaching out to support services across the state to make sure that their students have better access to more wraparound services. So that's part of what we call the needs assessment, and districts have to sort of think about partnerships in a very different way. We didn't want all this money to just go within a central office and no one ever sees it again, right? So we're checking in with the Oregon Department of Education and folks on the ground about what that looks like, and are pretty excited about the progress on that.
Nice. Did you want to comment additionally?
Well, one thing I would say, one of the other interesting things about outdoor school is that, we want to make sure it's accessible to kids that might not have that opportunity to get outside. And so we're thinking really about how do we make the facilities, the camp facilities, accessible to all kids so that everyone feels welcome and has that opportunity. I mean, and the other thing I would say about the equity issue that's true of both of these measures, and it's so important, is that often kids that struggle the most in those classroom environments are the ones whose lives are just changed by that opportunity to have those hands-on experiences. And I know that's true when we get kids outside, and those changes, and it's not only them, but it's also how other students view them, because they are able to interact with school differently in the outdoors and in that hands-on environment. It's how the teachers see them, it's how their classmates see them, and so they go back, and we know there's less behavioral problems in the school. We know that there's better attendance for the kids that go to outdoor school, and that lasts through middle school. So it's a win.
So exciting. Toya, Measure 98 is so often, I hear it referred to as the CTE bill, as if that's the only thing that it addresses. Yeah. So chat a little bit about the other nuances, maybe things that folks aren't as aware of that this work is going to accomplish.
Yeah, I hear that a lot too. It's the CTE measure, and I was like, okay, fine, vote yes. What we really, for us, the folks who sat down and thought about it and wrote it, it was really about making sure kids have a different experience from day one in high school, even before they got to high school. So part of Measure 98, the dropout prevention piece, for me was the most important nugget of this. And the way I talked about it was, you make sure your kids are coming in on track and then give them different opportunities, whether it's CTE or college level courses, but it starts with making sure kids are on track. I can't tell you how many superintendents we talked to along the way who said, I know who is probably gonna drop out, but I can't do anything about it until they have one foot out the door. Right? And sometimes that CTE class brings them back in, but really we want to make sure that kids have a different experience on the way in on day one. And so what the measure actually allows districts to do is reach into 8th grade, see what's going on with kids in the 8th grade. As they're coming into high school, give them a leg up. Sometimes that means a summer school opportunity, sometimes that means before school or after school, but more supports for kids on the way in, and then restructure the 9th grade year so there is time and attention and supports for kids throughout that 9th grade year. And I think that's the hardest part of Measure 98 because it's not happening in any district right now across the state, right? We have that summer school before and after freshman year, but the freshman year doesn't necessarily look different from sophomore, junior, and senior year. So what we're doing right now is really pushing into some of the districts across the state to say, what does it look like when you have data for teachers and common planning time for 9th grade teachers and additional counseling and support and wraparound services for freshmen so that they come in and they leave freshman year fully fledged, ready to go in 10th grade, right, with the 6 credits they need to graduate on time. And so we're working with districts up and down the corridor to help them figure out what that looks like and use them as a model for the rest of the state. But for us, that dropout prevention piece, that coming into high school with a very different experience was super important. The CTE was easier for folks to connect to. We actually, as a state, between 2000 and 2010, cut our CTE programs in half. So we went from 1,200 programs to about 600 programs throughout the state. And to be honest, people really connected with CTE or career technical education in the commercials that we used, right? It was really easy to show folks in a CTE classroom talking about hands-on learning opportunities for kids, and it was to talk about dropout prevention, like what does that look like? So yeah, people really connected Measure 98 to the CTE component of it, but the other two pieces were super important.
Yeah, both of these measures so deal with student engagement and that ability. I'm having come from being on a school board where career and technical education is huge. It was always interesting to go through budget cut times and have community and business and industry come out and support it in the way that you see community come out and support keeping a football program. Right. You know, and so that ability to see that statewide for both of these, where there was such engagement, such a high passage rate, says something about what we value as Oregonians, which is stunning. So Nancy, there were some other pieces that I think connect to the outdoor school program. I went in 6th grade. It was a life-changing experience for me. It was the first time I'd been away from home for multiple nights. It was, a bit of a rite of passage. And then in high school, I had a chance to be a counselor twice because it was such a pivotal experience for me. I wanted to be on the other side of that. I mean, lots of tears at the end for everyone, tears of joy, tears of, new confidence levels. So, but there were some other pieces too that were embedded in that. There was controversy about the funding mechanism. There are other components, leadership, et cetera, economic benefits. Speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, well, I'll start with the controversy on the funding a little bit. I think Oregonians the lottery has been used for things around economic development, natural resources. Oregonians have voted with lottery dollars for education and to protect our parks. So I think that it's clear that Oregonians felt like this was an important thing to be part of that. It's always hard when you have revenue challenges in a state, but we also, during the process, looked at the economics of outdoor school, and I think that was one of the things that was really exciting to me. I think we don't value the jobs that education creates enough, and education creates jobs all across the state. And outdoor school creates a lot of jobs. When those programs were cut, suddenly, in a year, there were a lot of people who lost their jobs because of that. And those are real jobs that pay well and are good family jobs. We really hope expanding it is going to give opportunity for economic growth. We did a study that showed that it would, and economic growth in rural communities as well. So I think that's really exciting. The other thing, the leadership opportunities and the ability for kids to see a future working in natural resources is really powerful part of outdoor school. And the high school program is done in many parts of the state, and it's extremely successful. I've heard so many stories about people who just to be a high school student and to have kids looking up to you the way they do. It gives these kids in high school a huge sense of themselves as leaders, ability to see themselves as teachers, to see a future for themselves, and it really does change those kids' lives in many ways. And the really cool thing about having now a statewide program and having Oregon State running this is that now there's the ability to kind of collect all these great models that happen in all of these places across the state and have a way to share them out. Because right now, we don't have that. We didn't have that mechanism. Except maybe through the Gray Family Foundation, people would call us and say, so who's doing outdoor school, and what does that look like, and how do I get help, and how do I start this program? And now we have a group that is tasked with that, and we'll be able to do that, and we'll have great inquiry-based, solid curriculum, ability to kind of make sure that we are doing the research that we need, and know that we're going to be effective out there. So that's a really cool thing about the statewide program.
I just wanted to share a quick story. My husband and I met while teaching, and he grew up in Oregon, and I distinctly remember when we first met, I asked him, what was your most memorable experience from from school? And he said, oh, outdoor school, for sure. And I said, what is outdoor school? I grew up in Louisiana. We do not go outside, and we do not do school outside. So the idea of being outside for a week and having that stick with people, it absolutely does. And I'm super excited that the measure passed, and my kids will someday have the opportunity to have that same sort of experience. So good job. Kudos to you guys.
And maybe you can be a volunteer parent and experience it that way, which
sure.
is also fun.
You need to go to outdoor school.
I'm still learning to be an outdoor person. So yes, for sure.
We'll get you there.
Sure.
That's terrific. So ramping up this year, what have been the biggest surprises about this journey?
I've just been so struck by how excited people are about this opportunity. they have said to myself, to my team, to folks around the state who worked on Measure 98 that like finally we can take some things off the shelf and like make them happen. So many of the things that were in Measure 98 are usually things that districts apply for and don't necessarily get the grants because there's not enough money to go to every district in the state. And so just the idea of having their own set of dollars to do things that they've been dreaming of for their kids for years was not surprising, but just like super exciting and heartfelt, and just really happy that, you know, even with half the resources, districts are excited and ready to go, and really, again, looking forward to full funding. I'm going to steal that for next biennium.
For me, I think the biggest surprise has been the national interest in this. Wow. I mean, constantly, we just have people all over the country that are pointing to this and saying what leaders Oregon are in this work. And I mean, I think it's the place we should be. With the outdoor industry is robust and growing here, and just our love of outdoors and our roots in the natural resources economy. So that's been really exciting to think that, you know, we might be starting something that will spread in other places into other states. And there's a lot of excitement around that. I mean, obviously there's a lot of excitement here in Oregon, but that was the piece that really surprised me.
You mentioned, you know, prior efforts being grants that you apply for. Because both of these are statewide, there's not this sort of competition amongst, you know, districts and schools to get limited dollars. Do you see opportunities for collaboration and sort of innovation, creativity as we move the work forward?
Absolutely, and I think our education service districts are playing a huge role in what that looks like. They usually are an entity that oversees or works with districts across an area. And we've seen a lot of education service districts sort of pull together resources to say, okay, these 4 districts are doing this very similar program. How can we work together to get economies of scale? This is particularly true with some of our smaller rural districts. We don't want necessarily every district to create the same exact programs if kids can sort of go between districts. And so we've been super excited about the work happening at the what we call ESD level. To make sure that our districts are working across boundaries, because sometimes the boundaries are just across the street from each other. And what we also are seeing is working with higher education, community colleges, 4 years, to say, what kind of programs do we have here that our high school students can have access to? So we've seen a lot of collaboration across districts, but also across entities from K-12 to higher ed, so that's also super good and exciting.
Yay, we love that. Nancy?
Yeah, I mean, really similar. You know, the ESDs have just been amazing in this work, and they always have been, and I think they're the opportunities for collaboration and working with schools and working with program providers has really stepped up. The other interesting thing is, I think, is once again this OSU extension, you know, and the opportunity to bring in their expertise and the expertise of the extension offices around the state has been really great, and really it will be a huge benefit. They have 4-H, they're the home of the Oregon Environmental Literacy Program, and they're home of the Oregon Natural Resource Education Program. So they just have all of these resources that are going to be so vital as this gets going.
Very cool. So there's another resource I'm thinking of in regard to leverage, and that's the public. And as you know, you don't have the full funding that you hoped for, but anyone here, anyone listening, anyone watching, if they wanted to help support, what are some of the ways that they especially could get involved as you kick these off?
Well, we love support from out across the state, and you know, it happens in all sorts of ways. We've had wonderful volunteers at outdoor school programs and helping camps, and I think, you know, the camps are going to need a lot of support and a lot of love as the years to come. They're going to need a lot of volunteers helping make those camps look great. But of course, you know, support to your legislature about how important this program is to you and to your kids. And you know, the governor has been incredibly supportive, but you know, you can tell her too.
I would say ditto, and working with, talking with your local legislators, but also your local school boards. Going to the school boards and saying, and asking questions, what are you doing with these resources? How are you engaging CTE, career technical education teachers? How are you talking with high school principals? I think that is a link that we definitely need to continue to make stronger, how the districts are working with the people within the districts who are on the front lines to ask them what they need is super helpful. We can't be in every single 197 school district across the state, but parents are there. So asking superintendents, asking school board members, but also connecting back to the legislature to talk about your kids' experiences would be a really helpful tool for us as we look forward to this next biennium. And highschoolsuccess.org is our new little website. Is a great place to go to get a lot of information about what's happening, and pretty soon we'll be able to show you what's happening in your own school district. So, but in the meantime, asking your own elected officials, people you get to vote for and who are accountable to you, how things are going and what they're looking forward to and what they're doing with resources would be helpful.
And at their local school?
And in their local school, talking with their high school principals. We have been spending a lot of time with that group of folks over the last couple of years, but really asking what's different because of Measure 98, and what the plans are for their particular high school would be helpful. Thank you.
Excellent. Great. So once you get through this ramp up and you have full funding, what are your hopes?
I always hesitate to peg a number to things because high school graduation rates, moving them at the state level is hard and takes time. But, you know, I always think of 15-year-old Toya sitting in high school and really having the opportunities to get to a place where now I'm sitting here with you all. I want so many more Oregon students to be able to have that same sort of experience, like get what they need from high school so that it becomes a launching pad to go wherever they want in the future. And that's not a number, that's not necessarily 100% graduation rates, but that would be great. But I don't want to have any student in the state sort of not have that kind of opportunity. So that's sort of our goal, and I'm not sure, you know, how long it will take to get there, but we'll keep working until we are.
Thank you. Nancy?
Yeah. Well, I would say that, you know, we really treasure this landscape in Oregon, and raising a generation of kids that understand their place as human beings in this ecosystem that we live in, and understanding how to take care of our natural resources. You know, as we were talking about this bill, we look back at the time when this first started and all of the years that kids went outdoor school, and some of the things that came years after that, like the bottle bill and the beach bill, that really were showed Oregon's leadership in this area. And so I think I'm really excited because this is a program that doesn't tell kids how to think, it teaches them those critical thinking skills that they need. And so I think there could be amazing things that come out of raising a generation of kids that have access to programs that really engage them in a very hands-on way and get them to think critically about the environment around them.
Wonderful. Well, let's go to the audience for some questions. If you've written a question on an index card, if you would hold it high in the air, staff will come by and collect it. And you can also submit questions through Twitter using the hashtag FridayForum. I'll try and read at least one or two index card questions and one from Twitter. We'd like to now invite City Club members to ask their questions at the microphone. Asking questions at Friday Forum at the mic is a benefit of City Club membership, and membership is open to everyone. Please identify yourself as a City Club member and ask one question in 30 seconds or less. Thank you.
Jim Zarin, City Club. It's interesting to me to hear this whole discussion, which I think is great, but I didn't hear the words federal, Trump, or United States Senate $1.7 billion transfer of equity back to the states. Now, the reason I asked that, excuse me, is I'm wondering, since you two have been at this a while, and you've been interacting with so many people in the state at the local level, since January 20th, when we had this new guy in the White House, and the Republicans in the Senate and the House have been doing what they've been doing, have you sensed a difference in the interaction with Oregonians about whether they say, I'd like to do this, but everything's happening in Washington, or we got to do this because nothing's going to happen in Washington? Have you sensed a change in people's interactions with you because of their awareness of what's happening in Washington or not happening in Washington?
Thank you. Who wants to take that?
Ooh, so we do work at Stand for Children at the federal level, and it's been frustrating, but also not knowing what will come next from one day to the next and what to expect. I will say that I've been talking to Oregonians across the state since January 20th. They have said things like, okay, now we really have to dig in and take care of our kids together. And work together on solutions that are facing our students and our teachers and our principals here in Oregon. So I've been encouraged by the number of people who want to work across party lines, because this is not a uniquely Oregon issue, but we have a really big problem in terms of our graduation rates. And so I've been happy and pleased and surprised. Trump doesn't come up very much in the legislature for us at all. We talk about what we can do as Oregonians to improve what's happening in our own state. I don't know if you have a different...
Yeah, no, it's great.
An index card question. Could you address the connection of hands-on science education in outdoor school with high school CTE goals? And how about high school junior counselors?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think giving kids that opportunity to see science in real life outdoors and get those hands-on experience and that inquiry-based learning leads really well to opportunities in high school and having those same experiences and having interest in those experiences. You've got to develop that love of learning in kids, and outdoor school has been shown to really do that with science, especially with science learning.
Perfect.
And CTE connection?
So there are, I think that's a ton of ways to connect with what's happening in terms of outdoor school with CTE. I think of environmental science classes where you're not just sitting in the classroom reading a textbook, but you're actually going outside doing experiments. I taught middle school science. We tried to spend a lot of time outside. So I totally see the connections, and what I love about Measure 98 is it leaves it up to the districts to figure out the best way to come up with these opportunities. We didn't want to legislate these particular classes and they look like this and this is what you do, but really thinking about the resources around you to figure out what kind of classes are best for your students. So
Nice.
Plenty of connections to be made.
Great. Back to the mic.
Virginia Cornyn, City Club member. This is a question mostly for Toya. The first Lego League and first robotics programs are very active in the state of Oregon and are extracurricular. Are there things in Measure 98 that encourage the schools, school boards, and parents to connect the extracurricular with the formal education?
Not explicitly, but not also left out of the conversation, right? So we really want to make sure that there's connections to what's happening, not just inside the school, but outside as well. And sometimes it's working with community-based organizations, but other times it's working with other programs that draw kids in a very different way. So I'm looking forward to other kinds of partnerships. We wanted to remove barriers for thinking outside of the box, and that is a great example of districts just not saying, oh, let's buy a new curriculum, but think about what else is available and bring that into the school day as well. So it's not explicitly stated, but it's not something that could be left out as well.
Thank you. And back to the mic.
Kurt Wavering, member. I very much appreciate the emphasis on experiential learning, and I myself have led groups of high school students walking around Mount Hood for 4 or 5 days and see some of the wonderful impacts, both short-term and long-term. So my question to you is, how will you measure, both short-term and long-term, what the impacts and the outcomes are of your programs?
So short-term, we're looking at expanding access to the kinds of classes that Measure 98 is asking districts to do. Another short-term measurement could be, so as a state, we measured 9th grade on track. So looking at the number of students from last year to this year to next year that are on track at the end of 9th grade or have enough credits to be full-fledged 10th graders. But yeah, right now it's really just looking at what kinds of opportunities are being created with these resources. Anything for outdoor school?
Yeah, I mean, in the outdoor school legislation, there's some pretty intentional things that we'll be tracking that were included in that, including how students are doing on science learning and math. And then there's some of the more, the things around leadership opportunities or how kids feel about leadership and cooperation and those other things that are measured better by teachers in the classroom. And so the OSU is working right now on sort of how will schools report on this and what are the measures that we're going to be looking for. And then there's a lot of researchers out there across the state and across the nation who have done some research in this, and we'll be using some of those metrics and some of those measures and tools that they've developed, and we're developing others. So we hope to have some really robust outcomes to show from this work.
Wonderful. Toya, on Measure 98, this is an audience question. What role did industry or trades play in getting this measure passed?
Oh, they were huge. They were, along with community-based organizations, one of our biggest groups of supporters. One of the things they talked about a lot on the campaign trail was not being able to find the workforce they need for all the family wage jobs they have. We have for example, we have a lot of people moving to Portland, not a whole lot of electricians, right? But all these buildings are being built. How is that happening, right? So thinking about the opportunities that we can connect to jobs in our area, connecting that back to high schools and making sure their courses are training kids to be ready for those jobs was huge. So yeah, they were a really big partner to help us think about what these programs could look like and help districts think about what these programs could look like. And so we couldn't have passed the measure without their support.
Great. Real world.
Yes.
Back to the mic.
Hi, again, I'm Colin. And so I was wondering, you talked a little bit about how accessible and tangible these measures were for voters, right? Yes, career technical education, dropout prevention, outdoor school, things we can understand. Vote yes, overwhelming support. And then on the other end, sort of the end result of sort of half funding based on what the measure said. Can you talk a little bit about that, the process that you had to engage in and the legislators had to engage in that voters didn't, of making trade-offs and what that sort of sausage-making process looked like, and how do you say outdoor school is more important than X other thing that is funded by the lottery, or CTE is more important than this other thing in this multi-billion-dollar budget deficit? So what did that process look like?
Sure. So, I would not say more important. There's a lot of important work out there that's being done, and it's always a trade-off. And but it's clear that the voters think this program is important, and we think that it brings a lot of long-term good that comes back in multiple ways. That was one of the reasons why we didn't just look at what this did in the school, but we looked at what the economic impact was in the state for allocating these funds to this, and it was net positive by a big margin. And so I think all of those things went into our thinking, and we also really recognized it was tough working, that the legislatures had some tough decisions to make, and we'd really love to support some revenue solutions, because we think that that's what we need. We need revenue solutions. We don't, it's, those are the fixes that are going to make this possible.
Same, but I would also say it was important to connect it back to what's happening on the ground in their districts. So many legislators run on the promise of improving education, on funding education, on making things better in terms of schools in their districts. So it was really important for us to make that connection back to their local districts. What can you do with Measure 98 dollars that you wouldn't be able to do if these dollars didn't exist? So helping to elevate those stories and talking about what happened on the ground with real kids that they know, real teachers in their districts was really impactful. There were a lot of tough choices the legislature had to make this particular session. It won't be easy this next time around either. But our job is to elevate elevate what's happening on the ground and ensure that they understand the importance of driving these sort of resources to districts so that they can have opportunities to give kids a better chance of success at high school.
Excellent. And now we'll go back to the mic.
Carol Witherell, first, thanks so much for this scintillating conversation. It was great. I think about, I guess my question is, are there some schools or districts that are really exemplary in uniting different areas of the CTE, or career technical education, and STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, outdoor education, and other areas of the curriculum in a way that gives students of different interests and different ways of knowing a chance to learn from each other, both within the school and within community service or internships in the community?
So we were just in Eugene yesterday with the governor for the bill signing ceremony, and a representative from the Technology Association from Oregon stood up and talked about the work happening in Lane County. There are 400 businesses in Lane County that deal with computer, software, technology, engineering, math, that kind of thing. And so they really came together and said, how do we make sure that we have the kind of workforce we need, homegrown, in our area to fill the jobs that we have here in these districts. And so they came together, went to the superintendents, went to the Lane County Education Service District to say, how can we help you certify career technical education teachers? How can we help you build these programs? How can we do internships with high school students throughout the district? That was so exciting to hear about, and they have been doing that just for the last couple of years and are really using Measure 98 resources in a very different way, because they're sort of a little bit ahead of the game in terms of working across industries with the school districts, across school districts, to provide internships and pathways and programs, and really thinking about how they're certifying their more teachers to teach these courses. So that was just one example that clearly stuck out in my mind.
I would, there's a lot of school districts that are doing a lot of great work. One of the ones I got to know pretty well was the Tillamook School District, that has really embedded environmental education or outdoor education into their K through 12 curriculum and done a wonderful job with that. And it is, so they have prioritized it by having someone in their community that is their natural resource coordinator and making those relationships with people in the community for this work, and helping the teachers make sure they can get their kids out to these programs. And it means that in later grades, these kids are thinking about things like creating programs that, how do they use the waste, or how do they deal with methane on ranches? And and in Tillamook County, there's some real issues, and these kids have kind of come up through the system, and so they're thinking creatively about how they solve the issues in their community as they get to the older grades.
So exciting. Great, let's go back to the mic.
Hi there, Matt Morton, City Club member. Thank you so much for coming today, and certainly thank you to City Club for the opportunity to hear about the sausage making, hear a little bit about this behind the scenes. I appreciate that. An earlier question inspired me to get up, and it was really about the synergy between the work that both of you were doing. And so it got me thinking. Senate Bill 13 also passed this year, and it requires Oregon schools to teach tribal sovereignty and other indigenous cultures within our public schools. So I'm curious where you might see some synergy as you go out and spread outdoor school across the state, how you might work with Oregon tribes and Native communities around the state in building in a curriculum for those students.
Thank you for that question, Matt. That is one of the things that I have to say I'm most excited about, and we also have a long ways to go in. But Oregon State University has set up an advisory council, which I'm chairing, and then we also have work groups in various different areas that are people on the ground all over the state that are thinking about how the different areas of outdoor school, whether it's the facilities or the curriculum or thinking forward. And they're going to be tasked with some of these these things to think about how we bring in that layer of learning for students. I think it's an amazing opportunity to partner with tribal organizations and other culturally relevant groups to think about how people experience the outdoors differently, and in particular with the deep roots of tribes in this state, for students to understand when they're on tribal land and the importance of that and the history of that. So it's one of the pieces that having this statewide program and having the ability to kind of gather that information and share it out, I'm really most excited about.
Wonderful. I think that's all the time we have for today. This has been so exciting.
We are out of broadcast time, and we'll have to stop for the day. If this program has inspired you to join or contribute to City Club, you can do so at the registration table as you leave the room. If you'd like to join us next week for a conversation on addiction recovery and public policy with William Moyers, please do. This is Colin Jones from the City Club's Board of Governors. Thank you to our guests, and special thanks to Bobby Regan and the Friday Forum Committee for their hard work. This meeting is adjourned.